Hello everyone! Finally, after 5 natlan patches, the original poster child of the region, Iansan, will be releasing as the newest 4-star character in Genshin patch 5.5. Although her rarity may not be completely fitting as one of the heroes of natlan, Iansan's actual kit strength more than makes up for it, as she's looking to be one of the strongest supports in the game. She is the first character that can act as a suitable alternative to Bennett, who is arguably the best support in the entire game's history. And although Iansan has her own set of limitations, in the right scenario she can actually be better than Bennett. To understand when and how Iansan can be so powerful, in this comprehensive guide, I will be explaining how Iansan works, the best ways to build her, her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations, while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC, including plenty of pre-release calcs on Iansan. Iansan is a 4-star Electropolem user that ascends with attack, sporting the second highest base attack out of all current 4-stars. She is designed to be an off-field electro support whose main role in teams is to massively buff your active character's damage with primarily attack buffs, just like Bennett, but without being confined to a circle. However, while Bennett limits you to stay within the circle for his buff, Iansan wants the exact opposite to maximize her buff: movement. Playing Iansan in combat is very simple, but the way her buff actually works has a lot more depth. First is her elemental skill. When sprinting after using the skill, Iansan starts running super fast, perfect for exploration. But when her skill is used normally, Iansan dashes toward an enemy to deal damage, generates 4 electro particles, and enters Night Soul's Blessing with the max amount of Night Soul points she can hold, 54. Then, if Iansan normal attacks within 5 seconds, she will stomp on the ground, dealing AoE electro damage. This will be important for activating her A1 passive, which I will discuss later. Next is Iansan's Elemental Burst, the main part of her kit. When used, Iansan deals AoE electro damage, restores 15 Night Soul points, enters Night Soul's Blessing if she wasn't in already, and spawns a kinetic energy scale that allows Iansan to stay in Night Soul's Blessing while off field, and it follows the active character for 12 seconds. This kinetic energy scale grants an attack buff to the active character, which scales off of Iansan's own attack. At talent level 10, Iansan's burst can give a maximum of 690 attack. With Constellations, a talent level 13 burst can give a maximum of 810 attack. However, how much attack is given depends on the amount of Night Soul points Iansan has. If Iansan has greater than or equal to 42 Night Soul points, the attack buff will always be 27% of Iansan's total attack up to the cap. However, if she has less than 42 Night Soul points, then the attack scaling will decrease based on how many Night Soul points she has. For example, assuming talent level 10 burst and Iansan having 3000 attack, if Iansan has more than 42 Night Soul points, she gives the full 690 attack because 27% of 3000 is 810, which is above the max attack buff she can give of 690. If she has 40 Night Soul points, Iansan will give 600 attack, and if she has 30 Night Soul points, Iansan will give 450 attack. Iansan consumes 6 Night Soul points every second, but her skill only gives 54 and her burst generates 15. Luckily, there are 2 other ways for Iansan to gain more Night Soul points to maximize her attack buff. First, while Iansan's burst is active, it will track how much distance your active character has moved and will restore Night Soul points to Iansan based on how much movement there was every second. Character movement is the primary source of Night Soul point generation for Iansan. Any distance-based movement of the actual character model will count, including dashes, jumps, and plunges, and even smaller things like burst animation. To be more exact, Iansan will restore 0.67 Night Soul points for every 1 meter of distance moved. While you can use this to calc Night Soul point generation for each character, the simple and safe TLDR and assumption is that if a character moves a lot normally in combat, Iansan's attack buff will be better for them. The second way that Iansan generates Night Soul points is with her A1 passive. Remember that this passive is activated easily when Iansan normal attacks within 5 seconds after using her elemental skill. With her A1, Iansan will gain an effect called Precise Movement for 15 seconds. During this effect, Iansan gains 20% attack and will gain 1 additional Night Soul point every second as long as she's restoring Night Soul points via movement. If the on-field character is a natlan character who can consume and restore Night Soul points themselves, then Iansan will restore 3 extra Night Soul points every 2.8 seconds. To greatly simplify the explanation of this passive, while Iansan's burst is active, she will restore 1 additional Night Soul point every second. If your main DPS is a natlan character, then she'll restore 2 additional Night Soul points every second. That's everything about Iansan's main buff to the team, but her A4 passive does give her another small way of supporting the team. After Night Soul burst is triggered, Iansan gains the warming up effect for 10 seconds. During this time, if Iansan restores any Night Soul points, she will heal the active character based on her attack every 2.8 seconds. Assuming 3000 attack, Iansan heals 1800 HP about every 3 seconds. Considering a fully invested Bennett can heal about 5k HP or more every second, while this healing is interesting, it's not very good nor is it extremely relevant. Lastly, like all natlan characters, Iansan Iansan has the typical Night Soul Transmission and Exploration passives. As a 4-star, Iansan has some important constellations that make her buffs even stronger. C1 effectively reduces Iansan's burst cost by 15, which greatly reduces her ER requirements. C2 allows Iansan to skip the required normal attack after using a skill to activate her A1 passive. In addition, with C2, Iansan's burst will give an additional 30% attack to the active character. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3. C4 gives Iansan 4 additional Night Soul points when another character uses their elemental burst while Iansan's burst is active, restoring up to a max of 8 Night Soul points. Also, if Iansan were to gain any Night Soul points over her cap of 54, C4 allows half of those points to be restored the next time she regenerates Night Soul points through movement. This primarily helps with making sure that you don't lose Iansan's buff at the start of a rotation while you're just standing still and using everyone's bursts. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly, C6 increases her burst duration by 3 seconds. And anytime Iansan restores Night Soul points and it overflows her cap of 54, then the active character will gain 25% damage bonus for 3 seconds. Because C6 requires a lot of Night Soul point generation, this constellation will only be active for characters that move a lot normally in combat. C0 Iansan is still a good support, but she does gain a significant amount from her constellations. The most important ones are C1 to reduce her energy requirements, C2 for the additional attack buff, and C6 for the additional damage bonus buff for units that move a lot. On average, C2 Iansan results in about a 5% team DPS increase from C0, and C6 results in about a 10% team DPS increase from C2, assuming the team can utilize C6. For reference, C6 Shavris, which is an extremely strong and important constellation for her, is about a 10% increase from C0. Thus, in order to unlock the full potential of Iansan's buffing capabilities, getting her constellations is highly recommended to improve her overall performance. And that's all the details about Iansan's kit. In summary, Iansan gives up to 690 attack at max talent level or up to 810 attack at max talent level with C5, 30% attack from C2, 25% damage bonus from C6, 40% more damage bonus from 4-piece scroll or 20% attack from 4-piece noblesse, and a small amount of healing with her A4. This is a lot of strong buffs, but keep in mind that only teams that move around a lot can actually access all of them with consistent uptime. For teams that don't move a ton, you'll lose the damage bonus from C6 and will likely receive a lower attack buff from her burst. But even with these lower mobility teams, Iansan still gives some solid buffs to them. Iansan's actual gameplay just consists of using skill, normal attack, burst, then swapping out, where you can ignore the normal attack with C2. And all you need to do is level her burst, as it will increase the max amount of attack Iansan can buff for the active character. Now let's go over Iansan's best build options. The main stats that Iansan wants is attack to increase her attack buff and energy recharge so she can burst every rotation. So some solid 5-star weapon stat sticks you can use are Engulfing Lightning, Calamity Queller, and Skyward Spine purely for the attack or ER. For 4-star weapons, the free-to-play polearm from the 5.4 event is a great option for the additional attack and ER. But Iansan's general best weapon choice would just be Favonius Lance. High base attack for a 4-star weapon and ER substat are great, and while it doesn't give as much raw attack or ER as the 5-star weapon options, the extra particles that Favonius Lance generates is amazing for team energy. For artifacts, like all natlan supports, her best set will be 4-piece scroll. The 2-piece helps with Iansan's energy requirements, and the damage bonus from the 4-piece is extremely strong. In most cases, Iansan will use this set, but in the few scenarios where you already have a better holder of 4-piece scroll on the team, then Iansan can run 4-piece noblesse for an extra attack buff. For artifact stats, go attack or ER hourglass, attack goblet, and attack circlet or crit rate circlet for Favonius Lance. For substats, prioritize ER until you have enough, attack percent, then crit rate if you're running Favonius Lance. In terms of energy requirements, it heavily depends on if you're using Fav Lance, if you're running 2 Electro units, and especially if you have C1 or not. The ER ranges I have listed should be sufficient enough, but I do recommend building even more ER as much as you can while making sure you have enough attack on Iansan. So how much attack does she actually need? With talent level 10 burst, Iansan will need at least 2,556 attack to share her maximum attack buff. At talent level 13 with C5, Iansan needs at least 3,000 attack. Keep in mind that Iansan gets in combat attack from her A1 passive and can get additional attack from her teammates. But don't be afraid to build more than these minimum requirements, as in teams that don't move around a lot and can't consistently maintain above 42 Night Soul points for Iansan's maximum attack buff, more attack on Iansan will give more attack for those teams. Lastly, let's go over Iansan's best team comps. Since Iansan mainly buffs attack, she fulfills a very similar support role to Bennett in teams. And while there are teams that can definitely use both of them together for an extremely strong attack buffing duo, in a lot of scenarios you'll be using one or the other. However, Iansan has some limitations. First, Iansan's little electro application can interfere with some team setups. For example, in Diluc and Gaming Vapor Melt Plunge teams, Bennett helps in enabling Pyro VV with Chen Yun for an additional buff. With Iansan, this isn't really possible, though she can serve as a Chen Yun replacement for Gaming specifically in AoE scenarios. Second, and more importantly, Iansan wants a lot of movement from DPSs to maximize her buff, as she drains a lot of Night Soul points every second. Since most carries don't move that much in combat to generate enough Night Soul points to maintain the max attack buff from Iansan's burst, this limitation makes her less effective as a universal buffer than Bennett. But even though most units will likely maintain less than 42 Night Soul points and receive a lower attack buff from Iansan, the attack buff is still nothing to scoff at, and Iansan still gives other buffs like 30% attack from C2 and 40% damage bonus if she procs 4-piece scroll. Thus, for most units that don't move around much, although Bennett is technically a better buffer for them, Iansan is still a viable alternative while bringing the quality of life of not being confined to a circle. For main DPSs that do move a significant amount in their kit, Iansan will be much more effective as a buffer. First, Cloran can utilize Iansan well in Chevreuse Overload teams as she performs multiple dash attacks in a rotation. However, Cloran does need to stay still and normal attack 3 times before dashing, and based on pre-release footage, while Cloran does move enough to maintain Iansan's max attack buff, she doesn't generate enough Night Soul points to maintain Iansan's C6. Also, Cloran's A1 passive makes it so that she doesn't gain as much damage from attack buffs compared to other attack scaling DPSs. Thus, while Iansan is definitely good with Cloran, she isn't that big of an upgrade over other Electro supports like Auroron or Sara. Next, Xiao works well with Iansan as he constantly moves up and down when he plunges, allowing him to constantly maintain Iansan's max attack buff and C6. Without a Bennett circle, Xiao doesn't have to worry about losing damage buffs if enemies are knocked away from him. However, due to how Animo reactions work, Iansan cannot trigger 4-piece scroll to grant 40% Animo damage bonus to Xiao. Because of this, Iansan is looking to be about equal to Farina in her slot. Natlan DPSs are looking to gain the most benefit from Iansan as they are mobile and generate a little extra Night Soul points for Iansan with her A1 passive, allowing them all to maintain Iansan's max attack buff and her C6 buff. Kaniche teams are looking to get significantly buffed by using Iansan instead of Bennett. Not only does Kaniche move around a lot when he swings around enemies, but Iansan being Electro and holding 4-piece scroll means you can consistently trigger the damage buff for Kaniche every rotation by triggering Aggravate, ignoring the issue that Pyro scroll holders had in reactivating 4-piece scroll with a persisting burning aura. Chaska teams are also looking to get buffed by Iansan, as when Chaska goes up into the air and starts loading her bullets, she's constantly able to move around. Along with all the buffs Iansan brings, removing the circle restriction will make playing Chaska much more comfortable. Mawika, the current best DPS in the game, is also getting buffed with Iansan's release. First, Iansan increases the damage of Mawika's Chevreuse Overload teams. Based on pre-release team DPS calcs done by hyperwebster, Iansan is looking to be a strict damage upgrade over Bennett, and this is the case if you use any off-field Electro support like Auroron, Yai, or Fischl. And second, even Mawika's Melt teams are getting buffed with Iansan. You can use Iansan alongside Sitlali and Shilonen instead of Bennett or Sucrose for a solid team, but what looks even stronger on paper is replacing Shilonen with Iansan and running her and Bennett together to buff Mawika. Based on hyperwebster's calcs, the Iansan-Bennett duo is extremely strong, making Mawika's current best Melt team deal even more damage, which is crazy. One important thing to note is that because Iansan and Bennett give so much attack, it does make weapons that give attack comparatively a bit worse for Mawika. For instance, instead of Mawika's signature being 21% better than Serpent Spine, with Iansan and Bennett, her signature becomes 16% better. Lastly, Veressa, the newest 5-star releasing alongside Iansan in patch 5.5, perfectly synergizes with Iansan with her constant dashes and plunges. In all of Veressa's teams, such as Chevreuse Overload, Plunge with Shen Yun, or Aggravate, Iansan is the best Electro support choice. Here are some pre-release team DPS calcs on a wide variety of Veressa teams done by hyperwebster. Feel free to pause to get a closer look at the different teams on paper performance and any extra details on the calcs. To conclude this Iansan guide, I wanted to share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Overall, Iansan is looking like a very strong support, especially with characters with high mobility and can take full advantage of her buffs. At peak potential, Iansan gives up to 690 attack at max talent level or up to 810 attack at max talent level with C5, 30% attack from C2, 25% damage bonus from C6, 40% more damage bonus with 4-piece scroll, or 20% attack with 4-piece noblesse, and a small amount of healing with her A4. In comparison with the two other attack buffers in the game, C6 Sara gives 700 to 800 attack depending on the base attack of her weapon, 60% crit damage to electro damage with C6, and 20% attack from noblesse. If Iansan has proper uptime on her buffs, she's generally a better buffer than Sara as she has a much longer duration on them. C6 Bennett gives 1000 to 1200 attack depending on the base attack of his weapon, 20% attack from 4-piece noblesse, 25% more attack with pyro resonance, 15% 50% pyro damage bonus with C6 and a large amount of healing for the active character. Assuming Iansan has uptime on her buffs, C0 Iansan will be a bit behind Bennett buff-wise, C2 Iansan is comparable to Bennett, and a C6 Iansan with all her buffs active will give more buffs than Bennett without being limited to a circle. But while Iansan can actually be better than Bennett, which sounds unheard of, there are big caveats to her strength. First, while damage buff-wise Iansan can compete, one big strength of Bennett is his incredible healing with his burst, allowing him to be the solo sustain for any team. While Iansan does have some healing from her A4 passive, it's pretty weak, so you may have survivability issues if you choose to use Iansan over Bennett without any other sources of healing on the team. Second, Iansan is a more Constellation-dependent character. In comparison to Bennett, who really only wants C1, Iansan also wants C1 to reduce her ER requirements, C2 for an additional attack buff, and C6 for an additional damage bonus buff for teams that can activate it. Iansan is still a fine support as C0, but her teams do gain a significant damage increase with her constellations, and as a new 4-star character, many people won't have many of her constellations, especially if they aren't interested in pulling a lot for Varessa or Shen Yun. Third, and Iansan's biggest limitation is the movement requirement to fully access her buffs. While it may be annoying to stay within Bennett's circle to maintain his attack buff and healing, this circle requirement is much easier for every character to meet, and they will all get the entire buff. In contrast, Iansan's buff requires a lot of movement for maximum effectiveness, as she drains a lot of Nitso points every second. While this may change in actual gameplay with our current assumptions, the reality is that most characters in the game don't move enough in combat to allow Iansan to even maintain over 42 Nitso points for her max attack buff. If I were to rank Iansan's best teammates in a tier list, then she's looking to be really only comparable or better to other supports for 7 main DPSs who have high mobility, and she's looking to be a clear upgrade for only 4 main DPSs who are all from natlan, which seems to be the story for all natlan characters. In most teams, Iansan isn't looking to be better than Bennett from a pure buffing and team damage perspective. However, even if Iansan isn't a better buffer than Bennett for most DPSs on paper, she's still a decent and viable alternative to Bennett in most teams. For example, even though DPSs like Arlecchino and Raiden aren't looking to move enough to allow them to get the max attack buff from Iansan, they will still get a portion of her attack buff. Even when Iansan drops below 42 Nitso points, her attack buff is not that insignificant, and if you can average about 30 Nitso points, you can still get about 50 to 70% of the max attack buff. And these units can still take full advantage of 4-piece scroll and C2, while gaining the quality of life by not being restricted to a circle from using Bennett. So while Iansan can only be considered Bennett power creep for a few carries, in most cases Iansan is still a viable Bennett alternative, and this is where Iansan's biggest strength and value lies. For the entirety of Genshin's existence, almost every single attack scaling DPS in the game has been reliant on Bennett's attack buff to deal a lot of damage. Without his buff, many attack scaling carries deal significantly lower damage. This created a team building issue, as with only one Bennett and Spiral Abyss requiring 2 teams, you either had to accept a damage loss from not using Bennett on one team, or you used a team that doesn't want Bennett like HP scalers or Dendro teams. But Iansan's release will open up team building choices and increase flexibility. As effectively a second version of Bennett, if you want to run 2 attack scaling team comps, now you can run Bennett on one side and Iansan on the other. And of course, you don't have to choose one or the other, as you can pair both Iansan and Bennett together for a strong attack buffing duo. So while Iansan does have her limitations that don't make her as effective of a universal support as Bennett, she's still a good alternative, and in teams with high mobility, she can be even better than him. And considering that Bennett can be viewed as the best support in the game for the entirety of Genshin's existence, Iansan being at least a suitable alternative in most cases, while in some cases can be even stronger, makes Iansan a very powerful and valuable support in the meta. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Iansan. Big thanks to hyperwebster for all the calcs shown in this video. He does some amazing TC work. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Iansan. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or click the subscribe button for more Genshin analysis and guide videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Iansan pulls.